Hello and welcome to Radio Writeoff. My name's Cole Scratch.
And I am not a hat.
And today we are unfortunately not joined by Zoe, who has been temporarily run over by a bus.
Yeah. She'll hopefully recover soon. She's in the hospital right now, she says in the chat. Must be for tire tracks and general abrasions.
Yeah, it's a tragedy, really.
But she'll get to hang out with Dubs, I guess, because he also got run over by a bus, so we're good.
Chilling in the hospital of temporarily and or permanently leaving the podcast. So this last round was Princess Not Included. I'm not going to try and pronounce the asterisk every time we say that, because that would be stupid.
Yeah. Yes, that's our prompt, and there was a fair amount of discussion about how stories were using it, whether stories were using it enough. There was some comments of like, where's the prompt in this? And Horizon actually, he posted a long-ish message in, I forget which story it was, but he talked about prompt use and voting about prompts, and we had some discussion about it.
I will admit that is one of the only comments in the thread this round that I've actually read. I've been that far removed from the write-off this round, I'm afraid. But I have actually read all the finalists, which is a plus. I don't know whether it's worth us adding more to this discussion, but I feel like we might as well while we're here, you know. So I'm going to jump right in and say I am pretty much completely on Horizon's side here, and agreed wholeheartedly with that post. I think it's important to remember that, yeah, you can vote however you want, and if you want to let something influence the way you vote, then let it. That's fine.
Yeah.
But I think Horizon made a really good point when he mentioned how voting based on the prompt and discouraging uses of the prompt that you can't really figure out yourself, not only does it discourage people from doing anything that might be slightly less interesting, slightly more interesting with a prompt than your standard plain interpretation, and it also encourages people to prompt drop, which again other people dislike as well.
Right.
But it also, in a way, you know, I can't remember what it was Horizon said. It was something like it discouraged something, and I agreed with him. That's what I remember. And the write-off site is down, so I can't check.
Yeah, no, I think he was saying it discourages people from taking risks, which is a big point. Discourages people from being well, and the other thing is, like, if all people want is a prompt drop, then that's going to go in. Like, yeah, I don't know. My take on it was a little more. I'm digging for the word here and I can't find it. My brain is failing me. I want to say practical, but that's not quite the right word either. But like, I don't think trying to police the prompt is very useful, simply because so much of the write-off already runs on the honor system. And so, like, practically, like, it's not actually going to improve much of anything if you try and police the prompt, because, I mean, if you're not willing to believe that people are submitting in good faith for the prompt, then why do you believe they're submitting in good faith for writing within the time limit, or, you know, not plagiarizing, you know, all that sort of stuff, too. I mean, we already run so much of the write-off on the honor system that trying to quibble over prompt usage and this and that just seems like such a small deal to me. And that's what I said in response. And, you know, the letter J, he had a point in the discussion too. He's like, well, shouldn't we at least try so that, you know, people try and keep the rules? And, like, I mean, there is a point there too. Like, okay, so if we've got a prompt and the idea is to use the prompt, then, like, at least trying to discern if people are using the prompts, like, that does help keep people kind of within the confines of the contest a little bit. But I don't know. I don't know if it's actually that useful, because it is simple enough to drop the prompt into an unrelated story, in my opinion. Maybe that's just the sort of author I am. I think I'm fairly good at twisting ideas around. So, like, I could think up probably 3 ideas of just about any story is related to Princesses Not Included, you know, if I try hard enough. Which is, I don't know, one of the reasons I get annoyed with people who see illusions and interpretations in things. Sometimes it's like, well, you could be right, you know. because like I understand maybe like personally how easy it is to twist the meaning of something around and point it in some random directions. Or, I don't know. I guess I kind of got a bit off topic there. As far as prompt goes on stories, yeah, I just don't think it's particularly useful for the write-off to try and
I
police
think
it.
the most important point that Horizon made, now I am vaguely remembering what it was that I read, was a point about how not seeing the way a prompt is used in a story is just as likely to be a fault on the part of the reader as it is to be actually a lack of the prompt. Horizon's pointed out how in the past there have been cases where people have said this clearly doesn't use the prompt, and then retroactively afterwards we've looked at what the authors said and gone, oh wait,
Yeah.
it did. Never mind. And I think it's important to bear in mind that when you can't see how something uses the prompt, it's quite possible that that's just because you aren't thinking about the prompt in the same way that the author has.
Yeah, and I mean, on the one hand, requiring the actual words in the story does very little for limiting what people write. Like, if all you require is to have the words of the prompt in the story, then you're not really going to affect what stories people write much. Like, people could write whatever and put the words of the prompt in it, you know. And on the other hand, like, if you go for a more, like, vague, vacuous interpretation, then you do run into that where, like, your interpretation may not line up. And that's, I think, where I was going with my, like twisting ideas around and stuff. Like, it always seems much more likely to me that I've missed the interpretation of the prompt than the person didn't include it. Because, like I said, finding interpretations that mean the prompt has been included is it's like totally doable. And maybe some of them are vacuous, but it's not hard to find ways that the prompt is included in most stories, in my opinion, if you try. But like,
yeah, I mean, my philosophy has always been to give the benefit of the doubt, wherever possible, and I think this is one of those occasions where that really does apply. If you can't see that a story uses a prompt, I mean, like I say, we can't tell you how to vote. We shouldn't tell you how to vote.
Can,
but I can say, look, I think
it's not like you should listen to us.
Yeah, I think just to remain in the spirit of the write-off, I think giving the benefit of the doubt is probably the better way forward. I think, and I might be wrong, but that's how I think we should probably.
Well, that does seem to be how the majority of people have fallen out on this issue in the past. Because this isn't a new issue to the write-off. It's not the first time it's come up. It won't be the last.
Precisely.
But if we keep, telling people how we think each time, well, maybe we can influence the culture. I don't know.
Yeah, agreed. But on the whole, I think, actually, prompt-wise this round, we've done pretty well. I remember I saw the prompt when it came out, and I thought, oh god, what is this? And now, having read all the finalists, you know what, I'm really quite pleased. Yeah, there's been some crossover of themes and stuff like that. Of course there's going to be crossover themes with a prompt like this, but I think it's led to a really nice variety of stories, and I've really enjoyed reading them, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, at least just going by the number of stories, it seems like this one did seem to work for a lot of people. I think we've had more stories this round than we have in the last minific round, and possibly even the one before that, although I can't check because the Writeoff website is down.
Precisely, but we're heading back up towards the triple-digit numbers. We're not quite there yet, but we're heading back up towards them, I think.
This round, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, so that was a good score. So well done.
Yeah.
Well done, everyone.
Good job, authors.
All right. I think, I think about 10 minutes is more than enough time to discuss the prompt and general trends. So, shall we start talking about the stories themselves?
Let's see what we have for most controversial. Is that where we start?
I think that's where we're starting. And I think it's safe to say that when it comes to specifically the two of us, but also the write-off in general, there is always going to be some disagreement when there's a poetry entry.
Yeah, some people just refuse to read them. I have seen that come up in comments of poetry stories before. And some people just love them to death, like just because they're poetry. So
I fall into the latter category.
Yeah.
Not always, but in this one instance, for only me, I don't know, like, I still haven't read the entirety of Only You. These titles are going to get really annoying. Can we just refer to them as me and you from
or
now
Me
on?
and OU. I don't know.
Yeah, that
I
might...
actually did read Only You because that was the first time I tried doing story readings for the Writeoffs, and I dropped in and people were like, you should read that one. So I did. I actually read it out loud.
Nice.
I guess. It was, 2,000 words, so... I didn't record it, however. But yeah, I don't remember too much of that one. But this is the same sort of idea to it. It's the Nightmare and Luna. And I do believe they actually take the same perspective. It's the Nightmare in both of them, maybe? It's been too long since I read the other one.
It's plausible. I think, for me, the one thing to say about this story is, regardless of what it means and regardless of what's actually going on, it is absolutely undeniable that this is some of the most gorgeous sounding poetry I have read in a very long time.
Yeah, well...
There's just something very pleasurable about reading it.
Yeah, there were some very nice phrases turned in there. I remember, like, once, they added a comma to a phrase and changed the meaning significantly, which was pretty clever. There was one or two other ones.
Yeah, that was the my honeysuckle darkened lips and my honeysuckle darkened lips, which is that made I squealed. I squealed a lot.
Yeah, some nice alliteration things. And the rhyme scheme is very pleasant. I think this one's... I compared this to Frost. I actually wrote a poem as a review for this one, Quill. I don't know if you got that far down into the comments.
Nice. I haven't read that far. I should have a look at that.
But the Writeoff site is down, so you can't.
Yep.
Roger. So, yeah. But I compared it to Frost. Bad Horse compared it to Coleridge with something like Kubla Khan, probably, which is somewhat more loose on the rhymes. And I profess to know nothing about poetry. Although Dubs tells me I'm a poet. So, I don't know.
And Dubs is, as we know, always right.
And his hair is always right, too. Except he cut it off. But yeah. So, I don't know. And I could see where Bad Horse is coming from there, comparing it to Coleridge. Because it is a little looser, I think, than Robert Frost stopping by the woods on a snowy evening. Maybe? I don't know. Maybe not.
I don't know. I think I found it really tight. I thought it was really, really well written. I mean, when reading this, it struck me as... Yes, it did break the meter very occasionally. But in fairness, that is occasionally due to, like, dialect differences. So the way I would read something is not going to be the same as the way you read something, for instance. We're going to put stresses in slightly different places. But I could see how you could read that line in meter, and it would work. It just wouldn't be quite natural to me. So I think, yeah, there's moments like that, and I think most poems will occasionally have moments like that. But there were far fewer of them than I was expecting to see. I thought it was really, really tight.
Yeah.
And the moment I spotted the rhyme scheme was...
Sorry, what's that? Oh, when you spotted the rhyme scheme?
Yeah, the way the rhymes mixed between the 4-line stanzas and the 2-line stanzas. I didn't notice that originally. I was like, oh, wait, hold on. This is a thing. Okay.
Oh, interesting.
It was pretty cool.
I was a little confused about those italicized stanzas, actually. When I read it, I'm like, what is he doing with these? And I don't know. Someone said that it's where the nightmare is... I think it was Trick Question. Said where the nightmare is like doing more seducing. But I was quite confused with them the first time I read it. Like, what is the purpose of these italicized lines? Why are they italicized? Why are they in a different rhyme scheme? Like, what is the poet doing here? And I don't know if I've quite pinned that down to my satisfaction, but I don't know.
I mean, structurally, I would say they are part of the stanzas. I would say that essentially these are 6-line stanzas. on repeat. It is a very simple rhyme scheme once you divide it up that way. It's A, B, A, B, B.
Right.
And I think that's the way you're supposed to read it, because clearly there is that that tie between the 2-line stanzas and the 4-line stanzas through that third line of the 4th-line stanzas in the rhyme scheme. So that's clearly the way you're supposed to be reading this. I can't quite tell whether they... like, usually when you see something switch into italics, it's a switch of perspective.
Right. I'm pretty sure it's not a switch from Luna to the Nightmare's
but
perspective,
it's not.
though.
That doesn't quite work.
Yeah, from my reading of the poem, it is the Nightmare the entire time, which is part of why I was a little confused about it, because that's the same thing I thought, is it was a a change in perspective, but reading back, that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it seems more like switching from, like, I would say the 4-line stanzas as more like internal Nightmare monologue, while the italics is to Luna.
I don't know. I mean, if you read like the 3rd or 4th verse, like, okay, the 4th one is how you flinch, how you glare, like it's pretty clearly talking directly to...
I think you can read it like that, but part of me wants to read it as like
the italics
passive
is
observation,
dialogue, and the,
you know,
the non-italics.
The italics isn't so much. Yeah, I would read the non-italics as sort of observation, like, and thoughts.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I could see how that interpretation would work, but it's not strong enough for me to. And I guess maybe that's me being, I want a strong interpretation here, because that is a thing I do. But
I think it's very clear that the italics is always directly at Luna. There's no doubt about that. That isn't internal monologue. But there isn't one I can see here that isn't directly at Luna.
I don't know. Something like the second to last one. You suffer so, how can they laugh? We'll craft from it an epitaph. Like, okay, that could be directly to Luna, but there's no it doesn't necessarily need to be directly to Luna either. Like, that's the same tone as one of the non-italics ones. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'm nitpicking. Maybe I'm playing devil's advocate a little too strongly here. Maybe it's me trying...
But that is the whole point of this section.
Maybe it's me trying to judge poetry too much like I would judge a story, because that was what Bad Horse and I got into on this one. I wrote, as I said, a poem in the reviews, and one of my verses, because I did A B A kind of thing, but I did A something A, because I didn't like follow the third lines through the poem at all. I just did them randomly. But one of my things was like I didn't see much arc to this, you know. And Bad Horse, he replied to that, and he's like, I don't think it's fair to judge a poem on the same standards you judge a story. I don't think you can call a poem out for not having arc, you know. And I was like, well, that's interesting, you know. I don't know if I'd ever really thought of that, because I mean, in my opinion, the things that make a story and a poem good entertainment should be the same across both a story and a poem. I mean, a poem comes with some inherent weaknesses to it because you use, or I should say at least a metered poem does, because you use rhyme and meter. And so like there's inherent weaknesses there, like it makes it difficult to write in certain ways. There's just some stuff you can't easily do. But on the other hand, there's some things you can really only do in metered. So it comes with weaknesses and strengths. So like, but on the other hand, I don't know if you can entirely say that a poem doesn't benefit from the same things either. But maybe it doesn't. I mean, maybe I'm entirely, like, that was my question to Bad Horse, was, is having, like, a single emotion in a poem superior to the type of contrast that an arc would bring up?
There's a quote I remember, and I honestly can't remember who it's by, but it's specifically talking about sonnets, and I think it's important to remember this is specifically about sonnets, but it's a quote that defined a sonnet as a moment's monument. The idea being that a sonnet should just be a standalone piece that essentially just perfectly captures one frozen moment. And so sonnets shouldn't attempt, I mean, they can, but they shouldn't attempt to tell a story. They should just describe that one moment. And you can imply a story in a moment, but you can't tell a story in a moment. And I think, that's one of the things that poetry does that prose can do, but should never really do. To the same extent. Poetry can get away with implying a story through simply just describing one thing that is not a story.
Interesting.
Yeah, Shakespeare sometimes disagrees. Lisa's commenting in chat at the moment. I mean, even so, Shakespeare's sonnets aren't so much about a single moment as about, from what I've read, and I've only read the first 40 or so, they're about a moment of emotion.
Okay.
So he's not capturing like a physical moment of time, but a moment of feeling, and a moment of feeling for the narrator. We're getting so off track here, aren't we?
Well, it's true. I don't know if we've got too much else. Let's see.
I don't think there are any other stories we're going to severely disagree on, are there?
Discussion out of, I guess. Most controversial. Well, you said that you felt a lot of the stories in this round were very incomplete. There just wasn't
this
enough
is going to be a fun discussion.
So why don't you expand what you meant by that? Maybe if you've got a specific example of one you feel is especially egregious, we can discuss it.
Okay, so the first thing to note is that at this point I don't want to call anyone out, but I'm probably going to have to just to have an example. I think for me, I found this round particularly frustrating to read. I enjoyed the stories, and I enjoyed reading them.
Right.
But there are occasionally... I have tried to sit out for a very long time on one particular discussion in the write-offs, and that is accusing stories, particularly in minific rounds, of not being stories. And I know we very briefly just kind of discussed that on Only Me, because, well...
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's less important for that one as a poem.
Yeah. Agreed. As a poem, it doesn't have to be, and that was the whole point of that discussion. I think there were other entries this round. And don't get me wrong, I enjoy things that aren't stories. I enjoy reading things that aren't stories just as much, and I don't want to discourage people from writing things that aren't stories. But at the same time, there's a difference between not writing a story and writing something that simply feels incomplete. And again, that's a tool that you can use. If you need to give a sense of incompleteness for the message you're trying to convey to the reader, then go ahead, do that. But a lot of the things I read this round felt incomplete without reason.
What is it that you feel they were primarily missing, or was it something different for each one?
It was something a bit different for each one, but in general, for me, the whole idea was essentially I'd get to the end of a story and I'd think, okay, why has this just ended?
Right.
And I know minifics... I want to talk a bit, actually, about what a minific should and can be. Because, it's very difficult in under 750 words to tell a complete arc, isn't it? Let's be honest.
This is the editorial. Go on.
Yeah. That was a terrible pun.
It wasn't. I'm not even...
But yeah, it's really hard to tell a story in under 750 words, like a proper, full, arcing story. And when people manage to do that, it's an incredible feat. Congratulations, very well done you.
Yeah.
But one of the things that's very easy to do in under 750 words is simply, wax lyrical on a single subject, usually a particular way of interpreting the prompt.
Yeah.
And to fill out the words and to pad it, you'll throw in a couple of tangents that are just amusing bits of writing that'll keep people interested. I understand that approach. I've done it before. I'm just as guilty as half the entries this round.
One that I specifically commented on as doing that this round was Royal Assent, I think it was called, where the ruling council passed to Celestia a bill that would have like named her queen and cut Luna out of everything or something like that. And she was feeling bad and decided, she decided not to stamp it because she missed her sister and she knew she was coming back and this and that. So it was like one idea. Okay, so like Celestia's emotional moment holding the stamp over that piece of paper. Like, okay, that was kind of, I think, like what the core of what the fic was going for, and it did that pretty well. I mean, I'm not dinging the fic for what it did, but on the other hand, a fair amount of the fic wasn't actually related to that. So that was, I would say, my quintessential example of what you're talking about there, as a story that has one small idea in it, and then it just kind of fills in around that and submits it. And that's kind of, to some extent, not a bad place to start with write-offs. I mean, it's definitely better than not having any sort of cohesion to your story. But on the other hand, I think the real challenge of the write-off is to see how big of an idea you can cram into it, or how many ideas you can cram into it.
I would try to discourage people from cramming too many ideas into a minific.
Well,
don't get me wrong, fun. It's a fun challenge. Give it a go if you want to, but
yeah. Well, the challenge is to fit them all in there just right.
Yes. I would put a 3 or 4 idea maximum on a minifig.
Is that where you would put like everyone's skills, or would you just say that like?
I would.
I mean, I would say do you think someone like, I don't know, Horizon maybe could pull off a like 6 or 7 idea minific?
I mean, I think anyone could probably pull off a 6 to 7 idea minific. I think the problem is it's just very challenging to do in 24 hours.
Well, yeah.
And very challenging to do in 750 words. I think if you want to do that kind of challenge, if you want to try and take that on board, go ahead. But I think it is going to be a huge disadvantage in a competition.
Yeah.
Frankly, because you will have, if you're doing, say, 7 ideas, that is about 100 words for each of your ideas. That's not much at all.
No. Anyways, I've kind of distracted you from talking about the stories that are actually in the round. So maybe we should leave the hypothetical.
Yes. The hypothetical 7 idea story.
Yeah. Maybe we should leave it behind.
I would point more to something like Standard Dragon Story than I would to Royal Ascent. Royal Ascent was, I think, yes, it did do that thing where it's just one idea, sort of. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Royal Ascent, I would say, would be my example of one that did it and did all right with it. Like, okay, it's not a stellar story, but it's not a bad story either. Like, it feels complete enough. There's just not a whole lot there.
Precisely, but if you do manage to, basically that's the sort of thing. If you're trying to do this single idea minific, if you're just trying to look at a moment, it's sort of what we were talking about with sonnets earlier. It's trying to just look at one moment and imply a story from that. Actually, Royal Ascent is a pretty good example of how you can do that. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a good example of how you might want to get away with doing that.
Yeah.
For me, I think Standard Dragon Story was one of the stories. I've just read it back now. And, I get to the end of this story, and I go, okay, now what? Because it doesn't really complete its idea. The idea that seems to have formed here for Standard Dragon Story, right, is, Luna is the mother of the constellations, and I guess that's sort of the whole, like, there's that idea, and dragons like to follow stories, but it all got a bit muddled. I don't know, like...
Yeah, I mean, my take on this one was that it didn't develop much in the way of an emotional core to it, because it went very, very quickly from a situation where you're like, okay, what's going to happen, to a situation like, oh, everything's resolved. Like, it was within the space of, like, 2 lines.
Yeah.
The entire story, like, took a 180-degree turn and went from fairly tense and unresolved to completely resolved with no tension at all. I mean, like, there's lots of plot ideas in here, but none of them are actually developed into emotional, connecting things that the reader is, like, drawn into, I guess, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think, this is a story with, 2 ideas at most. And even now, like, the stress of trying to cram those 2 very distinct ideas, I must say, like, the 2 ideas that are being presented here are so different as to be, it's quite impressive that you managed to cram it into one story in so few words. But the story is starting to show the strain of that, I think.
Maybe.
But for me, I think the point you made about tension is a really important one. I think a lot of stories, you can almost define them by suspense and tension. That is how. Yeah, that is how we define, plot structure. It's how we define. It's how we feel when we're reading a story. They're the most important things.
For thinking about pacing, I think, is thinking about how much tension and stress is in a story. Well, and you do run into how big an idea is, too. And this is one that came up for me in My Sister's Keeper, or Her Sister's Keeper, I believe. In that they've got this huge idea. Like...
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's a ridiculously huge idea. And they're cramming it into this minific, and, like, they just barely managed to squeeze it in there, which, I mean, I was fairly impressed that they managed to get the whole thing in there, but it gives me this ridiculous mood whiplash. Because it's like trying to deal with these two characters and characterize them at the same time that you're, like, redefining their characters. Like, it just, I don't know, it just swung from one extreme to another much too fast, in my opinion. But it did have a lot of tension, or potential tension, in it,
I mean, I would say Her Sister's Keeper is done really well. And I'm not just saying that because it has a bookend structure.
Literally, there's letters on each end, so...
But in all seriousness, I think it... I admit, like, I am very strongly influenced by something that ties together structure in that kind of way, particularly in a minific. I think it does a really good job, and I think Her Sister's Keeper does an amazing job ending with that repetition. Just tied everything together in such... I mean, the fact that they ended on that repetition allowed it to do so much more, and to tell such a larger story in the few words that it had, because that second time you read those words, they're suddenly full of a very different implication. They've got a very different connotation and meaning to them the second time round, and I think that's allowing the author to explore a much bigger consequences. A much bigger consequence for this action. It becomes a symbol right at the end there.
I guess my real criticism for the story is that it goes so quickly from one mood to another. Where it's like, okay, the beginning diary entry is like, I'm so sad, this and that, and then all of a sudden someone's trying to murder her. Like, it's like, next line. And I don't know, maybe I'm just have a small amount, very little patience for something that changes mood and tone that quickly, but that kind of did not work for me at all.
For me, I think that's something that should be used very sparingly. A sudden change in mood like that works when used rarely. I
feel like the key to making something like that work is to being able to redefine what's going on. So, like, if you've got all of the pieces to redefine what's going on set up, and when you change the mood like that very quickly, you can reorient your reader very quickly so they can see those pieces. Like optical illusions, when you go from seeing the vase to the faces, like the faces were always there.
Yeah.
You just didn't see them, And I think that the key to being able to make a change like that work in a story is to have both the vase and the faces. And so as the author, you're like, okay, here's the vase, here's the vase, here's the vase. And then you say, oh, look, faces. And they realize they were there all along. Then your reader won't be lost. They won't be disoriented by the sudden change because you're not actually changing anything. You're just changing how they see it. And that's what I think is the key to making a transition like that work. And this story was just too short to have any of that.
I think the biggest problem, I think you have a really good point there. I think the biggest problem comes from where they've put that transition. If this were not a minific, if this was, say, just 1,000 words, author, if you do expand this, because it's a good story and it's worth expanding, I would strongly advise lengthening the introduction, giving us more time before that switch, because the switch happens barely before the reader can actually get this sense of where they are and what they're doing, you know? So the moment... It's like you've just stepped into a room, and the moment you've got your footing, someone pulls the rug from out under your feet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you need that time to get your footing first. That was a terrible analogy. But, you know, it made some sense.
And then they can pull the rug out from under your feet.
You know,
like
yeah, but
you
it's
just
easier
set the table, and then they pull the tablecloth out from under the plates.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's the difference between allowing you to set the table first and doing that while you're setting the table. That's the difference here. That's what this fic does. This fic pulls the tablecloth off the table while you're still putting the plates down.
Yeah, that's actually not a bad analogy, because the reader is trying to orient themselves, you know, in the beginning, and then it's like sudden change, you know. But yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I do think this is a great idea. I like ideas that have lots of emotion in them, and this is a surprisingly plausible idea, even ignoring the stinger at the end, which I liked the stinger at the end, I'm not going to lie. Because she goes on about this thing that Pinky had being contagious, and then at the end it's like, she heard a squeak, like the beginning of a laugh, cut short, you know, it's like, ooh, you know, which I thought was really clever, because I do like that sort of cleverness, but I do think that this idea is, either needs a rather more elegant, I mean, doing it in this small amount of words might be possible, but like you need to be an extremely elegant and economical writer. It's just a really big idea. Doing it in more words is probably the easiest way to do it, honestly. But it is good that you tried, author. I do applaud that. And I'm pretty sure I scored for that too. But
it's a fantastic job. Very well done.
Find anything else to argue about here? We've already argued about 3 stories, Quill. We're doing pretty good.
I know, right? It's not really arguing when we're agreeing on a couple of them.
Well,
but,
okay. But we're bad at arguing, so this is like the best we're going to get, I think.
Precisely. I was just going to quickly say a couple of others that I felt had some issues. One thing I want to say had a bit of an issue of trying to do too much might be the player in the game.
You know, I honestly felt like that one didn't do much. Like,
yeah, it balances on a dangerous line, because on the one hand, right, there's some very crazy stuff going on, right?
Yeah.
Incredibly, like, meaningful things are happening in terms of, like, lore for the world and how much crazy weird stuff is happening. But at the same time, none of it seems to have any impact whatsoever, and I think the only thing that adds...
true, because it does fairly clearly have an impact on rarity.
Yeah, I think the one saving grace of this fic is those last 3 words.
Yeah. Now, I in my review, I called for the author to give us a clearer idea of what this actually did for rarity, because it's pretty clear it does something for her, you know. And I think it would be interesting to get inside her head and see what she is actually dealing with here. Because, like, I like the ideas, but okay, incredibly grandiose ideas have always attracted me. You know, so like the idea that playing a board game could like summon meteors and like bring out nightmares and like, you know, I like that a lot. The grandiose ideas, the epic scenery in the background of the story is something that I'm just generally attracted to, and I think that sort of thing has a lot of potential to like work well in a story. Like, I don't know, my personal theory on what makes a story good is that it should have depth of emotion. And I think working with grandiose ideas has the potential to reach an extreme depth of emotion, because like if you've got a long reach, you may end up grabbing something really cool. Like Betrayal is a great one. Something like Colding Gardez's Land of the Blind, you know, he works with betrayal there in like 2 directions even. And it works very powerfully on the emotional axis. So like I think grabbing for large ideas, like that this game that they're having has such a strong impact on the world around them, even if it's just a perceived impact on the world around them, is interesting. Like, I'm attracted to that because I think it has a lot of potential there. But it's never really clear what it's actually doing. Like, for rarity, you know, it's fairly clear that it's not doing anything like necessarily to the world around them, because Twilight says it's all harmless. It all vanishes at the end. So I mean, entertaining as the descriptions are, and they're pretty good descriptions. I mean, I like purple prose, and Quill, you have obviously, you love your beautiful words.
I do.
I think it does all right with those. But yeah, I would agree. It doesn't. I think we're agreeing. Are we agreeing?
I think we're sort of agreeing. I mean, for me, like, I felt the one really, really weird thing about this story is that these consequences seem to have absolutely nothing to do with chess. Like, why? Like, it would make so much more sense, I feel, to me, if what was going on in the world had a bit more to do with, you know, the actual game that they were playing, rather than,
now,
you know, just
there were, I think,
as...
two things here that had something to do with the chess. The one line was there's no princesses in chess, only queens, which is interesting, because there do seem to be references here to both Chrysalis and Nightmare Moon.
Of course, yeah.
Which is neat. And then the other one is, at one point, they move one of the pieces and the library moves. And I thought that maybe I think it was the castle, was supposedly like the library building. Which I thought was pretty cool. But you are right. It is not clear how these tie into the chess theme, because chess is you know, could be thematically important here, but it's not clear how it's being used in the effects. I don't know. Maybe there's a better game. What would you suggest? Something like Tarot?
I don't
has
know.
like
There's
ridiculously pounds and pounds of symbolism in it. Of course, then you lose the Queen's line. But
I mean, the fact of the matter is that chess is, you know, an excellent game to use for symbolism if you're using the right symbolism. I mean, there are two fanfics actually I can think of right off the top of my head. I believe that use chess symbolism. Kitsunorizu is one of the ones I'm thinking of. I can't remember the other one for the life of me who wrote it, but I remember reading two fantastic chess fics, and the fact is they've kept the whole symbolism and meaning of the story deeply rooted in chess metaphors, in metaphors that make sense within the game of chess. Like, you know, what's going on here doesn't really seem to be consistent. It doesn't seem to fit very much. Like, there's the occasional things, but for the most part, it doesn't seem to really fit within the space that is chess and chess metaphors. And I don't quite understand why chess was chosen, apart from that Queen's line, and even that seems a bit, you know,
shoehorned,
like an excuse more than anything else.
I don't know. That is interesting. But I think I agree with you there. It's the symbolism in the story is not pulling its weight.
Yeah, I agree.
Or rather, the scenery is not acting symbolic in the way that I feel it should.
I absolutely agree with you on that one. Hooray!
No, although I think I called this one out as well in my review for like, they talk about queens and princesses here, but with rarity involved, I feel like they really missed an opportunity. They don't say anything about kings. Because I feel like that's something Rarity would be interested in, you know? With her whole, like, super romantic
yeah, no, that's fair.
stuff, but interesting.
Shall we have a go at author guessing?
Oh, man. I don't even...
Given we can't access the Writeoff site to see who's actually in the finals, this could be disastrous. I can only remember, like, 3 people who actually made it into the finals, like, just names I saw on that list when I checked earlier. So this isn't going to go well, but we can give it a shot, I'm sure. Do you want to go first?
I really, I'm super bad at all of this.
So am I. This is going to be hilarious.
I should roll some dice.
I'm pretty sure I saw Dub's name on the list.
He was in. I don't think he made it into finals, unless he wrote 2 stars.
I'm pretty sure I checked earlier today the guessing page.
Okay, so guess one for Dubs then.
Okie dokie, this is going to be fun. how wrong do I want to be? I feel like this is going to be difficult. Bearing in mind we know Dobbs has written something fairly meta that didn't make it through, right? Is it more likely to look for something meta-ish or quite literary, or to look for something Dobbs might have done as another side of the scale, sort of to balance himself out? That's the question here.
I really don't know, Quill.
I'm going to... I honestly have no idea. I honestly have no idea.
I'm super bad at author guessing.
So, conclusion. Neither of us have any idea who wrote what.
No. I mean, you could always take a pot shot at one of the people who does poetry. I mean, Mike does. He likes his metered poetry.
This is true.
And he did just read Only You for the Royal Canaanite Library recently, I believe. So, but I don't know. I have no idea either.
Yeah. Twilight's excitement can't be contained. Feels familiar, and I don't know why. And just... I can't put a name to it, but it feels like the kind of thing that one of the people I read fairly regularly would write.
I don't think Book Player was in this round, but Reason to be Proud felt to me like it should be a Book Player fic for some reason. It's probably not nearly enough shipping in there, but, well, it's kind of shippy, I guess. But, like, it was Rarity and Applejack, right? So,
yeah. Yeah, fair enough.
But I don't think she's in this round, so, yeah, I'm no good at author guessing. And neither was Titanium Dragon, I don't think, because he's always the second one. If it's not Book Player, it's Titanium Dragon, because their stories are surprisingly similar.
Yeah, which is a bit weird.
For no apparent reason.
Yeah. It's very weird, just those two in particular. They have similar stories and write-offs, and yet comparing them in chat, they do not come across as very similar people.
Although if you meet Titanium Dragon in real life, he's actually a lot less threatening than he presents himself as.
That's nice. That is nice.
Check if the Writeoff site is still down.
It is still down. Last I checked, which was about a minute ago.
Okay.
It is.
Let's see. Since we're not author guessing, or not author guessing with any. We got honorable mentions. Is there any story that you read in the non-finalists you felt was worth mentioning?
Is there any story I read in the non-finalists? Is a more important question, and the answer is no. Sorry. That said, I heard Dubs wrote something that's meta, so I'll probably just honorably mention that. You know me.
Don't. That one was kind of bad. Well, in my opinion, it was kind of bad. Perhaps you would enjoy it more.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I do want to go back and read the non-finalists. I just, I haven't had very much time this week. So I just got here today and I was like, right, I am binging all the finalists in time for the podcast, and that's it.
You might get a kick out of Groaning Grey Agony's one, because he did actually do one where ponies are literally batteries. And it was very weird, but it was definitely like, okay, so here's the one that has ponies as literal batteries in it. Let's see, did that one with Big Mac buying a huge box of batteries from Flim Flam Brothers make it? Or not? I forget what that one was called. I remember an Alicorn Too Much got a laugh out of me. It ends with a very silly joke. And, it wasn't stellar fiction, I don't think, but it definitely got a laugh out of me, which is always worth something.
That's always a plus.
So it was by Anonymous, I believe, but it's like...
Oh, goodness. Yes, I've seen that final
kid
line.
Teleports in, and it's like, Alicorn mitosis! And, like, everyone freaks out, and I was like, ooh. It's pretty funny. So, yeah.
Well,
anyways, were there anything in the finalists that you particularly enjoyed that you would recommend to others? Do the honorable mentions here, or personal recommendations here?
Personal recommendations. I'm going to throw out a personal recommendation for...
Wait, Twilight's excitement can't be contained. Didn't you say that one you were like, I'm totally shipping everything in this or something?
I am totally shipping everything in that.
Twilight Xbox.
Yeah.
OTT or something.
I'm a bit... I've become a little bit crazy when it comes to Sunset Twilight as a ship, so it just works.
Everyone
so well
could use more sunlight, right? It's
everyone
vitamin
could use
D
more sunlight.
shortage and like.
I don't know. I couldn't help but have shipping goggles on whilst reading Twilight's Excitement Can't Be Contained. But
really
at the same
dumb,
time, you know,
really dumb title in my opinion. Okay, it's like a dumb pun title, but still.
I just, in all seriousness, like even without the shipping goggles, it was a fun story that I enjoyed.
Okay.
I thought I loved the way the characters were dealt with, and generally speaking, it just made me chuckle a lot, and I like that. So yeah, if you haven't read Twilight's Excitement Can't Be Contained, guys, go read it. It's great.
Okay. I think I liked Death Party. Was fairly near the top of my slate, I believe, and I enjoyed that one a lot because like it was like kind of a non. It dealt with immortality, but it wasn't like immortal Anwe, which is like one of my pet peeves. So the fact that it didn't do that kind of maybe made me feel better about it because like you get into a story, it's like where's this going, and then it kind of like goes the way you'd rather it did go, and then you're like oh good, so maybe that's kind of a large part of why I liked it. But the characterization of Celestia and Twilight in that one is quite good as well. It's done fairly subtly, but it's also fairly effective in my opinion. So yeah, Death Party. I like that one. Go read it if you like Twilight and Celestia.
I think that about covers everything. So apologies everyone for rambling far too much about things that weren't the write-off.
Right.
And yes, that's all from us here at Radio Write-Off, and we'll see you next round.
Indeed. Have a good week.